Claire, I met Claire. I knew Claire on Twitter before I actually met her, so it's sort of like topical because we're sort of talking about communities and stuff like that. And I always remember just I remember seeing her picture on Twitter, like her avatar, and like always seeing her name about before I actually met her. And then I met her at the Women Tech Makers Conference about 3 years ago at the W5. And honestly, it was probably one of the best run conferences that I've ever been to. It was like so diverse and so well run, and like being like a person that has like a plant-based diet, like I remember saying to them that I'm vegan, and like they just instantly like made me like vegan sandwiches and had lots of stuff sitting there. And then the year after that, and whenever I went for the after food, they actually had like a sign where it was like, all our pizza is vegan friendly, and the rest of it, all your toppings, you can just pick yourself. So it sort of shows how diverse they are. But it's a really well run community, and that's not just one thing that she is. She also is founder. She also works with women who code, and she's an engineer at Rapid7. So she's going to talk to us tonight about building tech communities. And the title is Bit by Bit, Byte by Byte.
Okay, thank you. So I maybe thought this event was a wee bit more formal than it is, but I'm just going
to. I have slides. I have slides as well.
Okay.
It's just Amandine doesn't have any slides. It's okay.
Okay. So yeah, I'll not bore you for too long with these slides, but so I'm going to start off with a wee quote. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. So that's a quote by a guy called Howard Zinn, who was a professor of political sciences at Boston Uni, on the effectiveness of community, and I think it's a really powerful idea. So in general, the idea of community isn't really something that one associates with your career. Generally, it's to do with coming together for like a voluntary, unpaid, shared cause. And more often than not, people simply want work to be work and life to be life. They want to be able to switch off, and that's okay. But honestly, having a community of like-minded people who are in the same industry as you can have loads of amazing benefits. And I'm just going to share with you today, like a few things that I've helped to start, and a few communities that I've found really beneficial in my time in the tech community. So just to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Japanese concept of ikigai. So I don't know if any of you have heard of this. It's kind of the Japanese version of like a reason for being. And it sort of overlaps what you're good at, what the world needs, what you love, and what you can be paid for. So it's really worthwhile having a balance of activities and pursuits which make your life kind of worthwhile and give a sense of meaning. So personally, I find that like being part of community groups within tech has allowed me to sort of expand into more of these circles here. So my passion for technology can become something more than simply something I can be paid for. So whenever I was first discovering the world of tech community groups, I was an intern at SAP Belfast. I was being paid, but there was a kind of feeling of emptiness, like I wasn't doing anything voluntary or to change the world. So that's when I discovered the organisation Women Who Code, which was just starting up in Belfast at the time, and I knew I wanted to sort of help more women to see that a career in technology was a viable option. So I guess for those of you who don't know, Women Who Code is a global organisation that encourages and supports women to excel in technology careers. So at that time, I was one of two, I think, technical women in an office of 40-ish. I didn't really understand why, because tech is fascinating. So I joined the leadership team of Women Who Code Belfast, and ever since then, it's kind of been like a calling. I've seen the benefits of building and growing networks and communities. And yet I just want to help others who are so inclined to see the same benefit of communities. So you might be asking, what's this woman prattling on about? What's she actually done? Well, David gave a pretty good brief at the beginning there. So I worked with Women Who Code Belfast as their youth outreach lead for 3 years. So organising school events, writing and delivering workshops, going into university fairs. And I then became the director of the group. So I held that role for 2 years and expanded the team a lot. And during the time that I was director, I was invited to speak at Women Tech Makers Dublin, which is, so Women Tech Makers is Google's brand for women in tech. And it's part of the Google Developer Group community. So I love the idea of this conference. So I contacted the Google Developer Group in Belfast and set about organising my own Women Tech Makers conference for Belfast for the following year. So that was 2016, I think. But yeah, it's now been running for like 5 years, which is insane because time is passing so quickly. And the organising team is now around 10 people, so that's grown from just me, obviously. In terms of other things then, I guess I've been passionate about cybersecurity ever since I started uni. So when I went to my first B-Sides Belfast conference in 2017, I was really eager to get involved. So again, for those of you who don't know, B-Sides is a grassroots kind of conference focused around cybersecurity in the local community. And as you can possibly guess, there's a bit of work to be done around diversity there. So initially, because of my position in Women Who Code, I was enlisted as an advisor on how to achieve more sort of gender and like just general diversity for the conference. But I kind of wanted to prove that I wasn't just a one-trick pony. And so I began helping out with other tasks for the conference, just drawing on my experiences with women tech makers. So I've been on the B-Sides team for 2 years now, and I can tell you, hosting a conference on Halloween night is a lot of fun. We got to dress up as Grim Reapers last year, and yeah, do it. So finally, myself and a few others have started up a community group for cybersecurity enthusiasts, like throughout the whole year, called InfoSec NI. So it's not just B-Sides, it's a place for people to go in between the annual B-Sides conferences to sort of share security news, do workshops, that sort of thing. We actually hosted our first InfoSec security study group last night for a certification, so that was really fun. And that's all done through Discord now at the minute, so we found that really, really useful. So yeah, just a brief, why is community important, I guess? You probably all know, but being a part of communities that enable you to share interests with others is naturally a great way to make friends and acquaintances. I've made some real and lasting connections just from attending and hosting events and just chatting with people over a cup of coffee or a cup of something a little stronger. Being part of a community is also really important for building and expanding your network of professionals. It's always really useful to know people from a range of backgrounds and experiences, whether you yourself are looking for a job or you can recommend people to your organization. Another social aspect of community groups that I'd like to sort of highlight is that it gives you the ability to find mentors in your field. So people you can look up to, go to for career advice and who can guide you when you're just a little bit lost. Having a mentor is a great way to like step up in your career, and it's great to build relationships with like more experienced people in your field, as well as your own peers. So another way, another really important factor of community is that you can learn about your field beyond the scope of your work. So you're going to stand still if you don't keep learning. So even if you're only listening to one talk or reading one extra blog post a day, that's still something. And you can learn, I found you can learn about aspects of your field you didn't even know existed if you attend a meetup or a conference, and that might inspire you to do like a course on it or introduce a new methodology and work. Also, communities just enable resource sharing in a way that isn't really possible without them. So different people have different like methodologies and books that have helped them, and like I've just found that like I've been able to get book suggestions from people, and it's really helped me. So I guess those are all benefits of attending and being part of community groups, but what about leading them? So leading a community group allows you to gain like leadership, managerial and soft skills that you mightn't have the opportunity to work on for like years. Like I've been able to talk about my tech community work extensively in interviews, which is cool. And yeah, it gives you loads of cool skills. Also, being part of a community means that you can get free pizza quite a lot, which is always a plus. Right, so Steps to a self-sufficient community group then. That's all well and good. How do you keep a group going? Well, if you've got like several similarly motivated people working on the team, it makes your job a whole lot easier. It's really important as well, if you're the person who started the group, to sort of instill a collective sense of responsibility within the team. So if you sort of try to be a servant leader where nobody's above anyone else, I find it really works. If your team members feel like it's their project as well, and they have the freedom to be autonomous and be leaders themselves, they'll step up to the mark. It's really important to find the right balance between guiding people and giving them autonomy, but it's well worth it when it comes to forming a self-sufficient leadership team, and that's how I've managed to hand over the leadership of Women Tech Makers. Because I'm not leading it myself anymore, but I've handed it over to the rest of the team, and they've kept it going for a good 2 years now. So another secret to keeping groups going is reminding people that the community exists from time to time. It's really good to have a check-in at least once a month, even to sort of share ideas or plan some events, or have social meetings. It's important to not ignore the social element of community groups, and if you all go out for drinks or a night of bowling, it can help attract new members and also like deepen connections between existing ones, allowing room for new ideas. So that brings me to my final few points I'm sure you'll be glad to know. The importance of diversity, inclusion, and outreach. So your community group isn't going to have any members if people don't know about it, and if you don't keep shouting about it. So contact with your group is essential, and in this day and age, it's really, really good to have like a social media presence. And even if you only post a little, your posts will be read by somebody. So make sure they're like inviting and friendly. And I could actually give a whole presentation around like social media and stuff, but I won't bore you. Another really important thing, I guess, is to have a code of conduct within a community. So that makes people feel really comfortable attending events and lays out ground rules, and helps people to feel sort of safer within the group. So yeah, that's a little bit about the importance of community to me. Hope it's resonated with some of you. Obviously everyone's journey is different, but like helping to build communities and teaching tech has really, really helped me along the path to finding my ikigai kind of thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Claire. We're all muted, so we can't. You probably don't hear the claps.
How do I like pass over control to you or whatever?
If you pass over the controls to Jamie from maybe, if you hit 3 dots.
Yeah, no, it's multiple share screen, so
right.
Matt can jump up next if you're there. You're on mute, Matt, I think.
Yeah, I didn't really want you to see me saying how do computers work again.
You got the Wi-Fi signal in your bunker.
There we go.
Right, so I'm going to start off just with a little bit about me, and the reason why I'm going to talk about this is obviously I'm Matt Johnston, and there's a list, and most of you know this. The second list there is all the things that I've been paid to do. Where I have done something and somebody have given me money for it. And some of them are kind of interesting, like just being paid to meddle in things, or being paid to blog or whatever. Dishwashers, slightly less interesting. And that's just showing sort of the breadth of thing that somebody in the technology community can do. As for the communities that I've worked on in the last 700 years since I was Claire's age, I was president of Dragon Slayers. I helped find KubeCon. I started this Society for Creative Anachronism in Northern Ireland. I started the Mac User Group, and the reason for starting the Mac User Group wasn't apparent to me at the time. It just had turned into a company that still runs 17 years later. I started up Digital Circle. I started the Northern Ireland Software Innovation Network. It's not a great name. Block 54 was a gaming network. Heaps of coder dojos, 14 coder dojos I've had my fingers in, and obviously Raise and the community around that. So I've got a little bit of community in there. Now, one thing that I really took from Claire's talk was how collaborative and inviting and inclusive everything was. And sadly, well, apart from the normal stuff that, to be honest, nearly every network that I've ever been involved in has had lots and lots of white males running it. The other part is that I tend to run community stuff as a sort of a benevolent dictator. Run it for a couple of years, and then I tend to let people take over. So I picked up Slayers when it was on its knees and in danger of being closed, and we turned it from literally about to be closed into the largest non-sporting club in Queens, with a recurring, non-recurring grant that allows us to run a convention that, I mean, I haven't been involved in the conventions for 20 odd years. I mean, when we started, the budget was 500 quid. The last time I was speaking to the organizers, the budget was like 77,000. You know, I mean, they've done phenomenal work with something, but I find I'm most comfortable in the starting of things, and that's in businesses as well as communities. I mean, I ran the SCA until, to be honest, I just figured out I'd used up all my favors. Couldn't get people to do stuff anymore, so I handed it over to somebody else who had a whole new fresh set of favors that they could ask of people. And I think when the stuff that you're doing is kind of interest, but it seems a little bit like work, it's important to kind of collect those favors and use them to get people to do stuff. I will move on to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite slides ever. The idea here is it's, you know, don't drink from or don't worry about drinking from the fire hose. There's lots and lots of information that anybody that's listening or anybody that wants to start community. But, you know, you just have to, you know, look at the recording later on if it goes by too fast. I mean, one of the communities I think that worked really well for me was the Northern Ireland Mac user group. I started in 1996 when I was working at Nortel, and really what it involved was just helping people with their computers on an online forum, because there was nowhere in Northern Ireland where you could get your Mac fixed. I was doing Mac fixing within a corporation at the time, and really enjoying it. And then I just decided to help people on weekends, and I lived in a really, it was a really cool house up the worst lane in the world. And once a month, people would endanger the shock absorbers of their cars to come and sit in my house, drink tea, and I would fix their computers for them. I didn't realize it at the time, but all those community efforts that I was making with that would then eventually turn into Mac-Sys, which is the first proper company that I started, which still goes today. But I don't think I could have done that if I hadn't built up, you know, 5, 6, 7 years of goodwill as community. You know, so even though you might be doing something for the good causes, I mean, the example of QCon having such a high budget, you know, which, I mean, if you think about it, if you're spending 77 grand on, you know, you're contributing to the economy. Similarly with Mac-Sys, it was a community thing where the next logical step was to make it a business so I could really help people rather than just help people with software. And to be honest, being paid for work was better than the stuff that people were giving me out of the goodness of their hearts, like cigars I didn't smoke, bottles of wine I didn't drink, and blue Caraco. I have no idea what you're meant to do with blue Caraco. I think you keep it until you can gift it to somebody else. That's kind of the first part. I mean, the digital circle, which kind of leads into what I'm doing now, was an industry steering group that was elected. We had about 350 member businesses at the peak, 2,600 practitioners, and was around for a lot of years. We were specifically designed as a manufactured community with Invest in I support to try and figure out how many people were in the industry, because they kind of thought there's about 80 companies out there in digital, you know, and without doing any real work, we could figure out that there were easily, just the amount that I was able to find was about 350, and I think that we scratched the surface. And we certainly, I mean, I definitely don't think we scratched the surface outside of the greater Belfast area. So it was a huge struggle getting, you know, just finding people. But, you know, you would bump into one of the events we ran, this guy turns up with his son, and we are, you know, we're like, sorry, this is a licensed premises, your son can't come in. And the fellow says, well, if my son can't come in, there's no point in me coming in, because he's here to hire. He's looking for developers, 14 years old. But we wouldn't have even seen that sort of that ingenious little, young fella if we hadn't had some sort of community, if we hadn't been running events that were kind of very open to the community.
What was he doing at 14 years old?
He was building websites.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. It's just some people that take to it, from a very early age. Anybody that's run a Coder Dojo will know how annoying it is that kids are really, really much better at this than us.
Maybe just learn from generational thing,
I think sometimes
sort of progresses on.
So, this is the old Digital Circle website. We have a new DC website coming, the jobs board and everything, because actually over the COVID period, I've been inundated with developers wanting jobs and inundated with companies looking for developers. So it's kind of been an interesting time. But I believe, and the COVID emergency kind of proves that these sort of digital creative industries include everything really from IT to software development and games development and everything in between, are essentially the best expression of knowledge economy, and that's why we've worked with the Department for the Economy to make sure there's lots of postgrad courses. So if you've got a degree in computing and you want to do a bit more, you can upgrade that to a postgrad in AI. If you don't have a degree, there's a degree in data science that you can, or if you don't have a IT degree, you can do a degree in data science. And if you don't have a degree at all, there are the higher level apprenticeships. We've worked really, really hard to try and get people into this industry, so that they can take advantage of some of those community things that I think that Claire was saying. I am incredibly bullish on the digital community as a whole. I've found it to be full of some of the kindest people, some of the smartest people you're ever going to meet. And there's only been, I would say, it's one of those 1% things. I have only found about 1% of the people out there don't immediately wish you well, So, and I think that, this is part of it. I think that, to teach entrepreneurship, students and teachers must live it, but also to teach anything in digital, I think people have to be making stuff. My favorite lectures, whenever I was doing my postgrad, were those lectures that were actually making things, that were actually doing things with their with their digital skills, and every business that I've ever started has come from these lines, where I don't mean that they're actually idiots, but I mean it in the most affectionate term. The first thing I ever made was a published role-playing game, and it was because a friend of mine had published a role-playing game and it looked lovely, and I thought, these guys are idiots. They're just common or garden idiots. They're not specifically stupid or anything. They're idiots like me. If they can do it, I can do it. And it was the same with my next business. It was, actually KubeCon was a perfect example. I went to see another con, saw that these group of guys that were just bumbling from day to day, just trying to get stuff done and running a huge convention out of it. And I literally said, these guys are idiots, just like me. I can do this. And I think that's one of the purposes and the power of community as well, that you realize that there's, this is not like these big conferences that are filled with people that have amazing boffin brains. These communities are run by people that put, honest, earnest work in there, that are thinking really, really hard about how to give everybody the best possible experience within the community. And they're having to deal with a lot of things that you don't see. There was a club in Belfast I joined years and years ago, and every meeting they had, once a month they had a meeting. Every meeting they had was part of the administrivia of running the club. And it was the little bits of politics behind it. And I think there's something, and it is probably my penchant for benevolent dictatorship. I just think that you should keep a lot of that away from the rank and file. That people shouldn't be able to really see that this is hard work. At some point somebody's got to pay the bills. At some point somebody's got to decide that somebody needs to get out of the club. As for digital as a community, I have always thought that there's opportunities for everybody. There are more opportunities and jobs and anything that we can actually shake a stick at. We have seen before that the tide is rising with regards to video games or ebooks or music revenue. Anything to do with media is massively oversubscribed now. This whole COVID thing just shows that we're kind of been a bit of a problem because nobody's really been filming anything for the last 2 or 3 months, yet we've all been watching everything. So there's not a lot left in the Netflix catalog that anybody has actually managed to watch. So they'll be desperate for more content. The second part is that the market has definitely changed. I remember the first time that I bought a video game online, and I was terrified at putting my credit card details in there. Just excuse me for a second. I said the market has changed. I mean, this, for example, is the customer that people are dealing with. You know, it's not somebody sitting, you know, but like I was at the time, terrified to put my credit card in. These guys have their own allowances and they are buying games online. And believe it or not, I mean, that's him having fun. But, you know, I always thought that, you know, video games would eventually look like this, that it would be a bit, you know, obviously I would look like Tom Cruise and I would be wearing really, really cool gloves. I didn't realize that we wouldn't have to wait till the year 2150 or whatever it is that Minority Report has said, and that actually that with Connect and everything you would see this. And now that we are, you know, I'm talking to you on an iPad that's equipped with LiDAR, you know, which was a system that was 10 grand 5 years ago. You know, we have all this extra technology and we have loads and loads of communities that help us deal with it. I mean, I imagine like whenever I was teaching, first of all, there just wasn't any computing out there. Nobody had a computer, certainly nobody brought it to class. And this is an old picture, but you can imagine the terror of somebody like, well, actually I can imagine my terror if I sat up there and just saw, you know, 200 faces all illuminated by screens, and I have to desperately be much more interesting than them, or, you know, than whatever's on their screen, which is, I hope, a great WhatsApp conversation talking about how great my lecture is. Unlikely, I know. And the next thing is obviously about about community, and especially the community in digital, is that you have to get up an awful lot earlier. I mean, this is a picture from a few years ago, and these are kids learning how to do 3D modeling at a Coder Dojo that I set up. I mean, you can see the ages of these kids. I certainly know the ones at the back there. There's one of them is 6 years old, and actually that little team, the best was 6 years old. You know, and he's using Blender to, you know, to make models. And he's desperately anxious. In this class, actually, just after this class, he was desperately anxious that Greg McGuire wouldn't like the work that he'd done. You know, Greg's response was, well, if I could hire a 6-year-old, I probably would hire a 6-year-old, you know. But what I mean is community enables people to learn an awful lot quicker, to get access to all this information. I mean, I was talking about a 14-year-old earlier, but if you can now get the equivalent of the skills that you would get from a degree without having to pay for the degree and without having to spend all that time in university talking to all those other people, then that would be, you know, that's a massive change than maybe what we had 25, 30 years ago, certainly whenever I was in college. Have you lost my connection? Looks like it.
Yeah, your screen's gone, but we can still see you.
No. Anyway, the next part was, I'll not worry about that. I do have a fabulous picture of 2 young men that are, didn't I Zoom just coop out? It did maybe. I do want to show off this picture because this is another power of community moment.
There we go.
So yeah, these 2 young lads are 13 years old at the time. I think they're now about 17 or 18. But what they did just through working through the community and people helping them was they built that little arcade machine there, which is a Raspberry Pi and a car reversing camera screen. And they didn't cheat by using USB joysticks. They actually wired it into a breadboard. You know, and it only took them about 4 Friday afternoons between 3:30 and 6. You know, it didn't take them long. I would say to them, look, if you haven't figured it out by, you know, Sunday night, give me a call and I'll get the code to you and I'll show you. And routinely, or no, I said Tuesday, and routinely by Sunday night, long before they had figured out all the problems just by harnessing the open source community to find out the problems, or harnessing whatever community to get PyKate working. Similarly, you know, this is a relatively minor project, but this is a design that was for making a case for a Raspberry Pi. And they took the designs from the community of the size of the Raspberry Pi, and they produced this, by just cutting up plastic in the laser cutter that most schools tend to have these days. And they sold it for $12.99, lovely rainbow colors, and made an absolute small fortune for the school that designed it. So it's, I mean, I may be looking maybe at the commercial angle of this an awful lot, but that's the part of community that kind of interests me, because communities only work so far when there's no money involved, when there's nothing to sustain it, when it's just goodwill. And I've spent a lot of years just seeing communities fall apart because eventually the goodwill runs out. I'll just skip past some of these. I mean, Minecraft would be another fabulous community that we've seen. I mean, I have witnessed, I don't know if you've seen the graphic where there's a the kid can't figure out how to tie his shoelaces, can't find anything in his room, and won't do the dishes, but he built a mansion in this. And his best friend, she's built 16 palaces and a working redstone economy. So there's definitely something about that idea of shared working and shared community that's kind of interesting. I mean, some people will recognize that logo. And yes, it's about maybe 3 guys sitting in a garage making it, but those guys wouldn't have met if they hadn't met at the homebrew club. They wouldn't know each other if they hadn't been showing off their stuff within the community to each other. It just wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have that that company. Ultimately, the first startup I ever worked for was not a hydrogen dirigible company, but you can kind of guess what happened to it. And the thing that I did was I started out with a couple of people from the community, and whenever it crashed and burned, the thing we did was we just started up again because we were buoyed up by each other. So some messages that I'm going to let you take home from this, and then I'm going to shut up. For anybody out there, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. They don't know how big you are or wherever. They don't know that you are, when you're emailing them and you're asking them, can they come and talk at this thing, or can they help me with set up bar camp Belfast, or can they help you with open coffee, or whatever the community is. Nobody knows that you're shaking in your boots whenever you're typing the email. Nobody knows that you are that you've emailed 15 people before them. They don't know all of this stuff. I certainly don't tell them. But you can ask for just about anything, and I think generally the community would be really nice and help you out. I think this is one of my favorite slides. I had this on the slides down in Newry once, and I do remember the councillor asking me, what do those words mean? And I was like, well, FTW means for the win, and W2F means what the heck. And it's just this idea of get yourself out there and start something. Start a community if you're not sure, or if you want to become good at something in a community, if you want to improve your career prospects, then start a community that is related to your career. If you want to be good at sailing, join a club or start a club. If you want to be good at building stuff in Minecraft, join a club or start a club. If you can't find a club to join, then start one. And you'll find that there's other people in your local community that have been sitting around going, I wish there was a club for this that I could join. Right? It just requires you to be a bit FTW and actually start that club. So, I mean, I tend to be very interested in those people who might stand out in the crowd. And I don't mean that they are particularly noticeable, but, are you that person that definitely people could flock to, and it's not about being the most technical person. It's even in a technology thing. I mean, I firmly believe that the most important skill in IT is personality. It's not actually technology. You could argue that, most of the coders that we know use Google or Stack Exchange anyway, but, you have to be able to stand out. You have to be able to be seen. So the IT industry in Northern Ireland has currently 2,000 empty jobs. We reckon it's going to be about 3,000 by 2020. So I like to try and convince people to use a computer to create. Our salaries are 50% better than the national average. They're better than every other industry. I mean, the only industry I think that you can make more money at would be crime or a conservative politician. That might be the same thing. It's the only industry that you can walk away with 8.5 billion in your back pocket. You know, that's what they sold WhatsApp or sold to Facebook for. And you can see why Quorum is you know, going to be as popular, because they describe themselves as WhatsApp with community management. And it's one of the few industries I've seen where you can get ahead based on ability and passion, not qualifications. And I think that's entirely because of the community feel. So, you know, this is a quote from Simon Hamilton a long time ago. You know, he wants people to be so noticeable online that prospective employers know of you before you sit down for interview. That's why you join the Northern Ireland Design Tech Stack. That's why you join Women Who Code. It's why you get involved with Coder Dojos, so that you've got this online portfolio and you've got these communities around you. You know, that's the other part of the quote. If they're so good, they're well known and ready. If they're not, they're shit. You know, if you think that you are not great, join a community, get better. Ask people for help. Projects are the new resumes, and the only way to show a project is to be part of a community. You know, there's no shame in a Mac job or a KFC job. I normally bring this into this slide and some actual application forms when I'm in the university talking to students, because I firmly believe that it's entirely up to them where they end up working. If they engage with the community and they start up some projects, they will probably slide neatly into a job. If they just do their portion, and then if they sit and wait for somebody to come and hire them, they'll end up with a Mac job or a KFC job. Not criticizing the job, just it may not be what they envisaged post-graduation. So that's about all I have to say about that. So do we has any questions or?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of questions coming through here, guys. Happy to leave them to the end or take some now, maybe. Maybe Amandine, if you want to go, and then we'll split the two questions between the three of you. That might be the best way to go.
Sure, sounds good. With me, I think it will be slightly shorter, but also a bit more chill out. I haven't planned any slides, and I'm just going to tell you a bit more about my experience of communities, and starting with a bit of my background. So my name is Amandine Flax. That's a very French name. So I have been working with early stage tech startups for now almost 10 years. In a few months, it will be 10 years. So I started working with my first startup when I was 18. And since then, I've been involved in the startup ecosystem. So in France, where I'm from, but also in the US. And I've been in the UK for now 5 years. And when I moved to London, it's funny because I was involved in the startup ecosystem already in France, but back then in Paris, you had networking events, but not like in London. Basically, you needed to be part of a circle to be invited to the event. So you couldn't just go on Eventbrite or an equivalent and browse for events. You had to be in a circle to be invited by some people to private events. And I managed to get in some, and it was very much fun and very interesting. I found amazing mentors there, and realized that actually helping startups could be a job, and I wanted to stay in this sphere. I also, when I was in this environment, I started working with very technical people, and I really enjoyed that. So it was a fantastic opportunity. But when I moved to London, honestly, I thought that I didn't know anything about the startup scene, because here it was very much different, and the big difference was the community. So I completely embraced it and tried to not be too much intimidated by it, because first it was a bit weird, a bit strange. I didn't know the codes, how to find events, where to go to. And I think, like many people, I made the mistake to book too many events, and I had a few times some burnout of networking events. You know, this burnout where you know that you should go out and meet people, but you don't want to. And even if you go there, you know that you don't want to speak to anyone. So that really the level and the thing that shows you, yeah, it's too much. You have done too many events this month. And so I really enjoyed this community and try to be more than just an attendee, but really be part of it. So as I said, I've been working with early stage startups. I mainly worked around emerging technologies. So I worked in virtual reality and augmented reality for a couple of years. Then I worked in the blockchain space, which is also very much community focused. And I've been jumping in and out startups. So working mainly as an independent consultant, working directly with the founders. And right now I'm building my own startup, which is still in stealth mode. We are building an AI company. And what we're doing is we are building AI powered bots for competitive gaming and esports training. So very early days for us, but it's very exciting to be on the other side of the table now. Talking about being on the other side of the table, I've also worked a lot on the investment side, I'd say. So helping startups understand their financial options, their options for funding their startups, but also I've been a scout for the London-based fund, backed VC, which is investing in Europe mainly and at seed stage. So very interesting to also put myself in the shoes of an investors and try to help startups understand what they can do on this front. And so I think I covered many of those roles in the startup scene. Maybe I've been in many shoes, which has been extremely helpful to understand everyone's position. So right now, as I mentioned, I am the co-founder of this young startup, but in the same time, I'm a scout. Plus, I'm involved in the startup ecosystem as a mentor. I've also started something called Entrepreneurs Playing Games. And I started this project about a year ago. Initially, the idea was to highlight the work of very early stage founders and deep dive into what they're doing. So the concept was a bit funny. I wanted to have a very chill out discussion and also let people open up on what they're working on. So the idea was to have founders coming to my place, play video games together, because I love video games, and then deep dive into their own story while answering people's question live. And we've done that for now about a year and a half, maybe soon. But COVID-19 happened. And so, as you can imagine, I don't want people to come to my place anymore. Even if I love startup founders, yeah, no, you don't come to my place anymore. So we've been moving the format online and many things had to change because of that. But I'm going to talk about this right after. I have a few points to make before on the community aspect. So as I said, I've been on different sides. And when I mentioned working with some startups in the past, what I haven't mentioned is that I had many hats, and that includes being a community manager or building places for startups to interact with each other. And so all of these were community based. And so I've been on the community creator, community manager, and community, I would say, super fan. And having those different roles really helps me to understand a few things about community. So there is one thing that Matt mentioned at some point. He described one of the community created by the number of people they managed to grow, which is one of the major metrics for measuring a community. You measure interaction, success stories through case studies or just stories, but you also measure it by the number of people involved. And interestingly, I found that sometimes it's not all about the number and the size of the community. Quite often, if you find a community that you really fit into, quite often, if it grows too fast, you may lose this identity, or it's very, very hard to keep this. So community are alive. It's not something that you own. It's not something that you control entirely, which can be difficult to understand or to accept for many people. But they have to. It's part of the journey, and it's part of the fun also, to understand what best fits your community. And you have a bit like a marketplace where you have different part of it, and you have to understand what what's best for people and what can bring the most value. So size of the community is one thing, but it's not everything. And sometimes when you're part of a community that is too big, you lose the confidence to talk aloud, to really speak your mind and to ask for help. Sometimes there is just too much noise, or sometimes the people who created it can't just manage such a big community. Sometimes there is just crap on it and it's just happened and you don't know how to fix that anymore. So big doesn't necessarily means better in terms of community. Also, I mentioned just before the mention of values and what value you bring to your audience, what value you bring to your community is very important. And this starts at the beginning of creating a community, when you choose which platform you want to build your community on. So David mentioned earlier that I recently created my own Discord channel, and before creating it on Discord, I actually spoke to people in part of my community and I asked them, so what would you prefer? What kind of platforms are you using? What would you think would be the best? So yes, you have to think about what tools you want to use, what kind of features would be useful for you to manage this community, but also where are the people you want to target. So when I started this live video interviews, I'm a big fan of Twitch, and of course I decided to live stream on Twitch, but my main audience are entrepreneurs, and they don't necessarily know about Twitch. I mean, unless you're a gamer. Well, now it's getting broader, but a year ago, unless you were a gamer, you didn't necessarily know about Twitch. And still today, I come across people who don't know about Twitch. But you mentioned YouTube, then there is a switch. You know that YouTube, it's free, you don't need an account, you just log in, and it's like Zoom. Everyone now knows about Zoom and knows that you just need to have the link, maybe the code to get in, but it's straightforward. If it's a platform they don't know about, maybe they're not going to download an app and use it as much as you'd like. So I mentioned that the format of those interviews had to evolve with COVID-19. We had to drop the video game part, unfortunately, because I can't remotely ask someone to download Steam and install a game, have a controller. I can't ask them to have the knowledge to just run the entire process or even share the screen or whatever. So I want to keep it extremely simple. But the other thing is, it actually taught me a lot, because I didn't want to stop the live stream at all. I really loved it. And I decided to change the format. And right now, what I'm doing is I'm doing live AMA and live chill out coffee mornings on Saturday morning. So we keep the same time slot of the week, but now it's more of a regular format. And the first time I did that, I was really petrified. I was like, what am I going to tell them? And the thing is, I've learned a lot because we created a stronger relationship. I actually had the time to learn about the people who were watching me. I had the time to answer people one by one, to ask them questions, to get feedback. You know, when founders come to my place, I have to manage them, my questions, the chat on my screen, make sure that everything is working well. It can be intimidating for them. So I have to make sure that they are comfortable. I have to ask my question. I have to ask the chat question. I have to keep an eye on everything, and I can't really spend too much time talking directly to the chat. But with this new format, I can. So I definitely want to integrate that in the future, because the feedback from the community has been just amazing. A few other points. So COVID-19 has affected the way I'm doing my stream, but it's also an opportunity for everyone. Just before the stream started today, or just at the beginning, we talked about if anyone has already booked an in real life event and has already been to any, or if they have tickets for one. I think, you know, this situation, the lockdown, has pushed everyone to move online, and it's maybe for the best, because what's the point of traveling to the other part of the world to do an event if you actually can have the same networking session with people. And I think more and more events organizers are getting this. They are getting the idea and they're trying new things. I recently went to an event organized by VentureBit happening in San Francisco, and I had lots of very interesting discussions online through the Slack channel. Whatever you like Slack or you're tired of it, it was super effective, and it was organized in a way with different rooms. It was organized, and so I didn't feel like I was just promoting myself on a huge chat and nothing was happening or just scam. I was actually having discussions with people, and I had the opportunity to be invited to some breakthroughs channels with some other founders. So lots of new opportunities to have a look at and to explore further. So another thing now, more specifically to startup, I think Claire and Matt mentioned a lot of very interesting points about being involved in communities, how it can help you, how it can help you, your resume, build new skills, just help each other, and how you can actually end up with amazing results. Something about that is that when you join a community, it's not just about you giving your time or you taking someone else's time. It's not just about that. It's way much more than that. You actually sometimes learn a lot by giving your time to other people. You make meaningful relationship, and that is the key point. And that's something that you don't necessarily always have offline. If you go to an event, I think it's complementary, it's not opposite. So if you go to an event, you may not have the time to chat with everyone. I mean, you have to make choices. You can't stay for the entire night. Make sure you say hi to everyone. And so sometimes you prefer to spend more time with someone, develop a longer relationship, have a good discussion, rather than just jumping from people to people. And so, you know, those online communities can be just complementary, and I hope that everyone will make sure to integrate that into the daily life, even after the lockdown, and even if everything goes back to normal, if anything goes back to normal. And, you know, there are some very interesting type of communities, and I would say maybe those days there are sometimes too many online discussions and not enough interaction. And recently I joined a few day-long events where you spend the entire day on Zoom. It's very long, you're tired, but you know what, sometimes when I join these events and there is an opportunity to chat directly with someone going through the same thing as you are, like other founders at the same stage, well, quite often I found that I learn more for those very short sessions with those people directly, rather than learning from an expert in a domain, because what they're telling is very interesting, but maybe I don't need this knowledge right now. Maybe an entire day of events on a topic, it's too much. If I want to deep dive into this topic, maybe I can find a video they recorded a few days ago. I don't necessarily need to be here live, but having this one-to-one discussion with a founder who is at the same stage as I am, going through the same stuff, this is extremely valuable. And recently I was part of a mastermind thing where we were actually meeting every 2 weeks. We were 5 entrepreneurs meeting every 2 weeks remotely, and someone part of Capital Enterprise was actually managing the discussion. So it was around online sales, but basically it was more about having a presence online and your first startup presence online. And it was extremely useful because even if there weren't always an agenda, it was very interesting to be open about what happened this week, what have you been working on, and step by step. It's not about promoting what you're doing, but it's about knowing what other people are working on, and you really care, especially if you have to meet them every 2 weeks. It's not just a one-shot thing. You really care about what they're doing, and even if the first thing they say or the first time they introduce themselves, you don't really see a connection, then after a few weeks you realize that yeah, they're actually going through the same stuff. So it's definitely, there is something to help each other here. So that's, I think, you know, being involved in the community is extremely useful, and it's it's not easy, especially today, because there are many communities online, but it doesn't cost you anything to join a Slack channel, see it's good for you, see if it's good for your vibe, and why not be involved, take part of it and really make the most of it, not just as a one-shot thing because you have a big need right now, but as a long-term relationship, building this relationship with people. Also, it can help with your personal brand, because even if it's really bad to just join a chat, to drop your link, or to put just a message the day you're launching a product, building this relationship step by step, well, the day you're actually launching, then these people will already know about you, and they know your name, they recognize you from somewhere. So it really helps for your personal brand too.
Awesome, Hamidine. Well done. Congratulations. That was a really cool talk. What you said at the start as well, just about entrepreneurs gaming, how you pivoted sort of from like having to have people not be able to come into your apartment to play games anymore. It's sort of rung a tune with me, because like I launched Your Delivery, one of the products I was working on over COVID, just through like being inspired by like bakeries and stuff, pivoted to delivery services. So like there's definitely interested in points that you were saying there. But we'll jump into Q&A after this, but I just want to introduce Claire McGee quickly. So if Claire, if you could unmute yourself, because there was a really cool project or company, or I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but Claire's going to describe it more, that's launched this week in Ireland. So basically there's this new group of women that are coming together to promote Irish entrepreneurs, and specifically Irish women and entrepreneurs. So Claire, if you want to give us a bit of an overview about what Awaken Hub is.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the opportunity, guys, for to give Awaken Hub a plug this evening. Really to give a bit of background, a group of us have been chatting for years. Many of you probably know Mary McKenna as a good friend. So through kind of different communities, 4 of us have come together. And we've been chatting for years about how to bring together the work that we all do, build the confidence of and amplify women founders, and the early interactions that we have as mentors with young women in terms of entrepreneurship. So from time to time we would chat about ways, you know, in which we could make the community more concrete, and our networks accessible to more people. You know, sometimes at networking sessions and, you know, when you meet for coffee, we're full of great ideas, and time kind of runs away with itself, and before you know it, you know, a year has passed and you haven't really implemented anything. So over lockdown we made the time, because for once, you know, all of us were in the one place at the one time. That was at home, stuck in front of Zoom. So we did have the, you know, the time then to kind of focus on, you know, how we could start to implement this. Really what Awaken Hub is, it's to give a platform for a first step for startups to learn about the world of investment, and to build the profile of female founders for potential investors and funding streams. It's a peer network to share expertise, support, events, mentoring, and access to like-minded women-led founders and co-founders. Just a note, Awaken Hub isn't exclusively for women. It's inclusive for all, however, it is built with women in mind. So we hosted our first event at the beginning of July, and the feedback was overwhelming. We had over 75 people who signed up, and we didn't do very much marketing on it. It was just through our own networks. So we had startups who joined us from across the US, across the UK, and across Ireland. And it was just really bringing together speakers to talk about kind of a no-nonsense approach to, you know, fundraising tips, you know, without all the jargon that investors talk about, and just to give them, you know, their stories of, you know, how they were able to access funding. So, you know, from the success of that event in the early July, we took that as a resounding yes to keep going and to keep doing what we're doing. And it's a social enterprise as such. You know, we're a group of people, we've no commercial interest in this. It's just about giving back, and it's always about paying it forward as well. So we launched our website yesterday. If anyone's interested, it's www.awakenhub.com. Our next event is on the 10th of August, and we'll be hearing from Gillian Doyle on her startup journey. a deep learning startup who just recently raised €1.5 million in seed funding. So really it's our attempt to bring all our networks together and just really to have a platform where people can come and learn and build a community. So it's at the early stages, and you can follow us on Twitter as well at Awaken Hub. So more than happy to take questions at the Q&A session, and be happy to connect with people after this if it's of interest to anyone. So thank you, David, for it was a 60-second time slot I had, so but thanks very much.
Oh, that was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing the information about Awaken Hub. Like, I was lucky enough to go to the first event you went to there, and like it was amazing. There was a really interesting set of speakers, and really well run, and we even did a bit of breakaway rooms and stuff like that, so it was cool to do a bit of networking while we were doing it. So that was really cool. Thanks for sharing that with us. I posted the wee link there to the chat there if anyone wants to click on it.
I actually have a question for Claire. Is it just for women in Northern Ireland? Because I'm in London, and I think I'm maybe the only one here that is not up there. So is it also open for people not there?
Yeah, it's opened. I mean, we have the network's open for, the platform's open there, and the events are open to entrepreneurs from anywhere. We've just been really focused, Mary McKenna and myself, we're based in the northwest of Ireland, which is in Derry, and Donegal, which is outside of Belfast. So sometimes, we find that a lot of things are central, a lot of events and networking and conferences, and are centralized kind of towards the east. So it's all about bringing all those different networks together. So it's completely open to the UK as well, and one of our co-founders is based in London. So yes, definitely, we'd be delighted to have you on board.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Claire. It's really good to kind of see another community going live. And thanks, guys, for sharing all your experiences within the community. Some really good kind of hints and tips of working within communities, how to build communities and manage them. There's a couple of questions coming in here, so I'll just work through a few of them. One came in from Andy, really just in terms of the change in engagement during lockdown. Do you think that's been positive or negative? Because most of it's now moving online. Claire, have you seen much sort of change online and engagement?
Yeah, a little bit. Because more people are online more often, like people will be more engaged and they'll see like social media posts more and stuff like that. So yeah, I find a bit of an uptick in engagement.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been easier as well. You can easily connect with people online because you say they're in front of their computer, they're looking for the next news, they're not having the social interaction to pick up the tidbits or the gossip, so they're looking online instead. In terms of you talked about the community piece, specifically with the women and tech makers, and talked about handing it over as well. The purpose of the community, have you found it easy to kind of keep the purpose of the community and everybody singing off that same hymn sheet? How have you found that sort of dealing? Was it yourself mentioned in terms of the politics and that type of thing in the background?
Well, I think the community groups that I would run are quite unique in that they're kind of bringing together like women or something like that. So it's not necessarily that we have like a topic in mind. We're just about women in tech. So I guess we're lucky in that regard because it covers quite a broad range of topics and subjects. But I suppose that would be more the case with InfoSec NI that we've just started. So yeah, I found it a little bit hard to sort of focus that group because we're not really sure who we are yet. But I think it's important to sort of have like a sort of mission statement, if you will, like about what you want your group to do or what you want to achieve, and sort of remind people of that from time to time and ask people what they want from the community as well, like get feedback and stuff like that. So I think that's how you sort of keep it going, is getting constant feedback and implementing what the community wants and sort of needs.
Yeah, that's a really good idea in terms of the mission statements as well. Worth putting something down on paper for people to learn and understand. One came in for Matt in terms of a lot of the talk this evening's been about the social element of it and kind of the, you know, not just the community and learning, but the social. And for Matt, what, if you're there, the most enjoyable event that you would have been involved in? I'm going to touch on that. Just on mute at the moment. Or Amandine, if you even wanted to, are you off mute? You there, Matt? There we are.
My connection's really playing up here. Hang on. The most enjoyable event that I've ever been, I don't know, apart from the ones I run. I have.
You talked about the bar camp quite a lot. What was it, the NI startup bar camp?
Well, yeah, back about 100 years ago, whenever we were getting this started, there was no event. I mean, about 2006, there were no events in Belfast. Never mind in Derry. There was no events. And it was a group of people that just pulled together for 2 events, and one of them was Open Coffee Belfast, which was just turn up, and you know, we didn't book anywhere. We just essentially invaded whichever coffee shop was open and bought lots of their coffee, which I don't think they minded too much. And it was a really, really nice community feel, and that then led into at the time Bar Camp was, you know, a thing that started in California as response to Food Camp. But that was the first sort of the young conference, this idea that people turn up on the day and they write what they want to talk about in a post-it note and they stick it up on the wall. And I think that there's some real value in that, in having a sort of an unfocused community with people talking about the stuff that interests them, rather than necessarily, you know, turning up to talk about a very, very, very specific thing. You know, and from both of those, that's where, you know, Digital Circle was born. It's where loads of other things came out. It's where, you know, those guys turned up about halfway through the year, and he said, my company is the company that actually drives the Google cars for mapping. I have been mapping all of this stuff, all of the, you know, of all this data about Northern Ireland. Is anybody interested? And he was absolutely surrounded by developers within seconds, and there were a couple of products that were made, you know, about 6 months later, as a result of the data that he'd essentially been collecting, you know, on somebody else's ticket, I guess. But the fact that he was willing to come and tell everybody, you know, this is the really cool thing. And then after that, when I was running events, DC related events, all the events were very specific to a sector. There was nothing just about, you know, we're all digital people, which is cool. But the bit that I really liked was when there were about 80 people in the Ecliptic Labs office one night, and one of their competitors stood up on stage and said, here's a widget that we've just invented, and it's really, really hard to do, and here's the code to it, and here's how it works. And I thought that was a moment where things have actually started to coalesce as a community, where you're realizing that the people that you're with are your collaborators, not your competitors, that it's not just about, you know, the fibers on the shelves that you're fighting for, but it's definitely about, you know, Northern Ireland as a community in itself, and the responses that you can get from that. I mean, that was a fabulous event. Yes, the cake was really good that night, but Chris McFallon bought really, really good cake. But it was, the thing I think I enjoyed most about that was somebody put something out, and the community was there to receive it, and they didn't feel threatened by it, and that's the reason why you start a community.
Jenny, if it's okay, and Matt, sorry as well, I had asked a question about what was the event or the group or the project that you'd most enjoyed. And I suppose the point I was getting at was this idea of, there used to be a punk scene in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. Belfast had a very famous punk scene, but we can't go back to that again. You know, we're never going to put that punk cork back in the bottle again. It'll never be like it was. And I remember Matt and Jace, Bell and George, and there's quite a few people on the screen, David as well, that 10 years ago when Facebook and stuff first came out, there seemed to be lots of stuff that was real punk, you know, really exciting, really motivating, really inspiring, and people were coming together just for the sake of coming together, and things like Start 6 were kicking off, and we had Core, and we had Biz Camps and Bar Camps and the Social Media Association for Business, and there was a real vibrancy then. and I'm saying this now as a 46-year-old that maybe has got the scars and the cynicism of age of being in business for a long time. Is that feeling that we had then, and Matt, I'm not sure if you would have the same feeling, and Jason, if you'd have the same feeling, but is that still here in Belfast now, or have we moved on to another genre? Are we now pop rather than punk?
I
Matt,
think it's really interesting. I'm going to jump in there just quick. I think it's a really interesting thing, Martin, because like I agree with you with that whole concept. I do think there was like a whole like alternative Ulster thing happening with that startup scene back in, because that's where I met Matt, and that's where I met Jace and yourself, like at those bar camps, and there was all this sort of chemistry of people coming together and just networking. But I do think that's sort of what we're doing now since lockdown as well, with all of these sort of conversations happening online. There is like that sort of opportunity to get back together and sort of network and stuff. It's almost like we're bringing back the band. Do you know what I mean? So we're like coming together and contacting, but like connecting. But like in terms of us turning pop, I don't know. Maybe Matt can talk on that one. Like maybe the scene has changed.
I would say that the scene has 100% changed. I definitely think that, I mean, it's part of what we're trying to do with the raise and the revitalization and the refocus of Digital Circle, but it definitely seems that for a while there, all of the events were taken over by recruitment companies, that they would let you in the door and you could have a slice of pizza and a free beer if you handed over your CV. You know, and that was sort of the impression that I got. I definitely think there's something that's kind of missing, and it really started around public sector reform, because when public sector reform happened, a lot of the discretionary cash that a lot of organisations were able to apply for just completely evaporated. So we missed out things like the Creative Industries Innovation Fund, and also, as I say, a heap of little events that would have made a real difference. There were little things like media funds, or there was maybe cash to get 50 people to work on, you know, on TransLink's website, you know, or their data. You know, we were able to pull people into a room, get you know, a couple of £100, buy a load of pizza, and get, you know, what was it at the time, 140 man hours of work in one weekend on TransLink's data. You know, and we just don't have the same opportunities. And I think part of it is because just some of the grease for those wheels has disappeared, and you're kind of doing it more on, you know, and you're doing it on goodwill, but goodwill doesn't last because people get tired of you asking.
I think the rawness is still there. It may be generational. I mean, Martin, Matt, me, we've got grey hair now. And we may not necessarily be the ones to start the revolution. But you know what? I mean, I watched my daughter pick up the R programming language in like 3 or 4 weeks just because she wanted to. And she starts pulling out stats, and she now knows more about the language than I ever did. And that's all off her own back. And she's talking to more people about this kind of thing. And her direction is very focused, but at the same time, there's no barriers for her. Well, I mean, she comes to me and says, "Can you buy me this book?" It's like, yeah, okay, no problem. But I don't know what she's doing. I know she's programming. I don't know what she's doing. And then she'll show me this stuff. Oh, I've done this thing. I've done this thing. I've built this model. I've done this algorithm. It's like, fine. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, just go for it. Do whatever you want. You know, so that there's, at that age, there's no barriers. Now, the interesting thing I think that will come up in the next 6 months is kind of where we were 10, 12 years ago. 2008, the financial crash had hit. There was a huge slump, job losses. And when there are job losses in the recession, the first thing that happened is that people take the initiative to actually go and do something by themselves and try something and try and build something, because they've got all the opportunity in the world and the time to do so. And Matt and I spoke about this a lot over a long period of time back at that stage, because I was unemployed at that stage. You know, 2008, 2009, I had no job. I was just trying to graft away and trying to pay the rent. And it was through standing up and speaking, which I still maintain is the best thing that you can do in order to get noticed. Anyone who's got the confidence to do that, it kind of opens doors for you, because you get remembered. You know, if you know, and I can quite happily stand on the stage, as most of you know, and I'll make a fool of myself for 20 minutes, but it's fine. I don't mind. It's part of the gig, as far as I'm concerned. We watched it over the period of time get kind of replaced, and Matt is absolutely right. The recruitment thing became before. And it's actually one of the reasons I stopped going to meetups, bar the distance. I mean, Liverpool to Belfast is 62 mile. For me, it's a 2-hour drive each way, find somewhere to park. It costs a lot of money. It's not just running up at a meetup, it's like 25 quid in petrol or what have you, and something to eat like each way. So that's why I stopped doing it. To the point Matt actually used to phone me on Skype for anything that he thought was important so I could hear it. Bless him. Thank you. That's the kind of community that I was used to, and I'm starting to see it come back. What would be interesting is, I'm rambling on, I'm sorry, is with COVID and everything that's happened, we'll see a mass redundancies happen, and that's where the new startups will come. And that's where the new raw power will come from. So I think the band is getting back together, yes. Yeah. But we may not necessarily be the people to do it. Raise, definitely, yes, absolutely. There's a great support network there. There's a great ecosystem in Belfast. And I've stopped being vocal about things, which is probably a blessing, because it got a bit too corporate for me.
I mean, a lot of the movement has been online. You know, you talk 10 years ago, there wasn't the Facebooks and the Slacks and the communication channels that we have now.
Oh, but we had Zoom.
Utilizing those communication channels online, meeting, having relaxed conversations, and then when you do meet in person, then you're like, oh yeah, right, okay. And like we were going to was it Digital DNA last year, and everybody was like, this is just like LinkedIn, just jumped out of LinkedIn in a conference, and it helps start those conversations. But it's having the face-to-face really does help. I mean, Amandine and Claire and Matt, you've all touched on it. You know, those sparks of conversations, collaborations come from face-to-face, and it's trying to make that work online too is the real challenge, I think.
I think one of the failures with the online thing is, although we're all here together on the one online room, if we were in a real room and we're all at this, the talks were over, and I'd heard what Matt had to say, or what Jace had to say, or what George or Claire had to say, I can walk over to them and have a private conversation without having to click on a button or without everybody else listening. And I appreciate you can do that by private messaging, but there's something about that real world contact that, I don't know, maybe those goggles are going to fix it eventually. Maybe, Matt, there's something coming down the line that's going to address that issue. But that sense of being able to go, there's that sense of being able to just go over. Remember when we used to be able to shake hands, stick out your hand, shake hands, smile at someone, start a conversation. I think that's the thing that's missing from the COVID period.
One of the other questions that came through really, and maybe one for Amandine, is how do you choose which community to dedicate your time to? Because there is so much. Like you said, you came from Paris to London. I mean, London's 10 times the size of Belfast. How do you choose which community to dedicate your time to?
Yeah, it can be very quickly overwhelming, and that's exactly what lots of people find when they start being active in the community. Just to jump on what has been said before, well, I may just been in the space for just 10 years, but I've seen some changes also. And I would like just to add that maybe I don't know about Belfast, I don't know about Northern Ireland, the situation there. And, you know, hearing that events are taken over by a recruitment agency, it's like big nonsense, and that's scary. But I don't know about the space there, but I definitely see a professionalization of networking and of community. But one of you mentioned earlier the notion of punk, and when you actually involved in very deep tech companies and ecosystem, that is where the punks are today. So maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was about startups, but now knowledge about startups is available online, and you have lots of resources, and generation are changing, the needs are maybe different, but what can be considered as being punk today may be more, you can find the same vibe in the very technical and very niche markets, like people who are experimenting with technologies. I mentioned I worked in the blockchain space for a while. Well, I can tell you that there you have real punk, people who are completely marginalized, people who are fighting for a society that is a bit different, different values, and they're pushing for their ideas. And you have a way more, like a very broad space, a very broad mindset, and people who are very, very open-minded and very open to have different opinions. And you can find that a lot in the subcategories, but not in the startup scene anymore. About finding the best communities, I think it's a choice people have all the time, and right now it's especially difficult because every possible community can be accessed. Like if you're in Mumbai or in Sydney, there is no shame of joining a community of people in London if maybe your target audience is in London. So there is no border now, and it's all about finding what values you're looking for, what kind of community, what kind of vibe you're looking for. My favorite community is very small. It's the Backed VC Scout community. We are maybe 30 people. We all are super active in the startup ecosystem, especially in London, but not only. And we are all just very open about what we're going through, challenges in our personal and professional life. And I think the fact that we are just 30 something people handpicked is really helpful. But very broad community, sometimes you can just find local community, and they are very much welcoming. Everyone knows each other very quickly. And I think that is the best way to get started.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful in terms of, as you say, trying to find a community that you've got values you're going to learn from, maybe it's got the same vibe, that type of thing. That really helps. Another question came in from Wanda, I don't know if she's still on the call, about community members and how they can help grow the communities that they're part of. Have you seen that, Claire, in terms of not just the leads of the community growing the membership, but the community members kind of referring on?
Yeah, I think there's tons of ways that community members can help to grow a community, whether it's like by word of mouth or over social media, or even getting involved in leadership like I did at the very start with Women Who Code. I think it's just all about like being enthusiastic and like, you know, giving back to the community a bit, because I guess to use an example from last night from the InfoSec NI study group, I was really nervous about it because it was like the first study group I had ever run, and like a couple of people, well, 5 people showed up, and they were all like super enthusiastic, and like that just gives me like the, I don't know, it replenishes my spirit. I can go on now, like and like they all seemed to like really want to hear what we had to say, and they seemed really engaged. So I think just, you know, engaging as a community member is really, really important. Even I think I'm rambling now, but yes.
No, that's good. Yep, that's good. It's up to everybody to contribute to community. I think that's probably the key point. There's a question here about software engineering. Do any of you know of software engineering good communities? You know, we mentioned earlier the NI Tech Slack group. Any others?
I think that would be a very good place to start. I mean, obviously, Tech for Non-Tech Founders would be another great place, and also our Silicon Drink About that we hold on once a month. I mean, in all of these cases, they're relatively, especially in the Zoom era, they're really low commitment. You know, I mean, you don't have to commit an awful lot of time. There's certainly no commuting and no parking to worry about. But yeah, those would be the first 3 that I would think of. And if the community's right, I would definitely. What are those other ones? There's the Women Tech Makers. But as well there's Django Girls, isn't there as well? You know, so it depends what they want, what areas they want to work in, or whatever. There's so many different communities, and there's the sub communities, you know, like the Google Developers Group. So I mean, software engineering is such a catch-all for everything. There's lots and lots of sub communities, and if they want to know, if need pointers to them, just gotta ask.
Like you said, Matt, if if you can't find one, just start your own Slack channel and say, I've started the
Yeah.
software engineering community. Please join.
Yeah.
The power of the hashtag on Twitter still counts as well.
Yeah.
I would say Farsight Labs would be a good place to start as well, because they're a really good like community of like different kinds of like engineers. So, yeah, I know. Yeah, they're just great. And a lot of like small startups have spun out from Farsight Labs. It's the Belfast hackerspace for anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, and notice they've reopened quite recently there, just for members. So like, you to check out.
And sometimes just by sharing what you're working on with anyone openly, lots of people may point you to some specific community, or if you're asking open questions, some people may also be helpful for that. And one of my friends is going to kill me if I don't mention that, but open source community, you can find very strong open source communities, and these people are amazingly well open, but also ready to help. My friend Eddie is managing his own community, and he's also doing lots of interviews and live stream on that. And yeah, he's always saying that, I don't know myself, but open source community are just amazing and extremely open.
I touched on it earlier, Matt, a wee bit, kind of the monetizing things. How do you monetize a community without losing the good? You know, it's a bit of a tricky one. You know, it's all about the value. What's it worth to them? What do they get out of it? You know, back to the admin and the time that it takes. Is it something that people should maybe think about doing or not doing? I suppose it depends on the community.
I think if it's one where there's something very specific, like it's very easy to start a club where people are just getting together and there's shared resources, you know, so not everybody has to buy their own archery set, or not everybody has to buy their own canoe, or whatever. That's one good reason. I always figured that if you're going to run a community and you're going to charge people for it, that the value that you should be providing to them should be worth at least 10 times the money that they're putting in. You know, so if you're charging them 50 quid, then yeah, make sure they get 500 quid's worth of value, and you shouldn't necessarily have a problem. I mean, that's at a minimum. If you're running a completely free community, and I would balk at the idea that any community is completely free. There's always somebody is paying for something. But if you are running something that is as close to a free community, then you don't have to worry too much about the value, and people will understand that it's best effort. Like our Coder Dojo that David and I run. I mean, I don't know if we're going to be able to run that again this year. You know, I think we're just 2020 going to be a blip where we just don't run one. Just in terms of risk assessment. You know, but I don't think people are too upset, because I've had a few emails that people want to join, but they're not too upset because it doesn't cost them anything. I mean, it's not like they're missing a year's subscription. Whereas, you know, my sailing club, I haven't been there this calendar year. Still take my money.
Another thing to mention, like Alex Evans is on the call there today, and he runs an open podcast community. So one of the things he does, if you want to see him, you can talk for himself. But one of the things he does, he sells an audiobook. So he's obviously running he sells a book. So he's running a community and getting all these people in, but then he's also selling his ebook on top of that. So that's sort of another way you can sort of monetize a community, is just selling your services to that community.
Yeah, and there's been people who've got jobs out of their services to a community, you know, or by showing that they're a good egg, or by showing that they've contributed. I mean, if you write something in open source and somebody spots it and hires you, you have effectively monetized that community. You know, you've turned that community into something that eventually, ultimately gives you money. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing, you know, bad about that. I think it just depends on the value. I like my benevolent dictator head on. It's just because I've seen too many communities where you just feel like you're being charged for stuff and you're not getting anything out of it.
Matt, I think that's a skill that I definitely need to learn, because all the community groups I run have been free. Even the conferences I run are free for people to go to, and you know, I would love to make some money.
But you see, that it depends what you're not looking for a bit of pocket change that you can go and, you know, buy a few beers at the weekend. You know, I started writing and publishing books because of literally I wanted to hang out at conventions, and I was sick of paying for a ticket in, and I wanted somewhere to put my bag. So by going in and going, we're the Northern Ireland games industry, you should really support us at GailCon and Leprechaun and WarpCon. They let us in for free. They gave us a table, and that meant there was somewhere for us to leave our bags full of our precious role-playing games in, and then sell a few books for beer money. I didn't drink beer, but everybody else did. Whereas, we know people who have got themselves really involved in communities and really pushed themselves in communities, and it has really benefited their careers. I saw one, Cherie was just, she's just got rehired in another role, and she said, she was on the market for 2.5 weeks, and there were people waiting and watching and inviting her to join. And I think that's monetizing essentially a community. She's done tremendously well by showing that she has talent and dedication, and she's willing to make it, turn that into work for her in her career. So it's we were talking before, Claire, about how every software developer out there is worth their weight in gold, and it really is just up to them to ask for more money. Especially if they run a community.
I think that's a lot of the questions there, guys. Anybody else have anything else to ask? No? It was a fantastic event. Really, really enjoyed it, guys. Really insightful. Some good tips to take away, both as being part of a community and also trying to, obviously, we're setting up between the Raise and Digital Circle community, kind of getting that up and running again. So lots that we can take away. It's fantastic. As Matt mentioned, we do run obviously these kind of tech for non-tech groups. We run Silicon Drink About. We're looking at that becomes in person or not in the next couple of months. We don't know, but if not, we've been running an online pub quiz instead, which is quite good fun. And we are talking about some sort of get together for founders tech community, kind of end October, started in November, and trying to put some events together where we would like to make it in person, but again, looking to see how that pans out. But already talking to different groups, and would love to involve you guys if you'd be keen to come along and be part of that. Something similar to what Matt talked about in terms of bar camps and conferences and workshops, and just having that face to face if we can, if not online, and trying to run those. So any hints and tips in running online that you've been seeing the best practice, be great to hear. Somebody mentioned breakout rooms, and I think it was Emma and Dean, you mentioned just different ways of being managed as an audience in a conference. It would be really good. If you pass those on, would be really helpful for us. But thank you so much, guys, for your time. Really do appreciate it. Have you got any more final thoughts to add before we finish up, Claire or Matt or Amandine?
Well, we've been talking about communities, so anyone feel free to just reach out, I guess, to me, but I guess Claire and Matt also would be very much happy to connect with anyone and just have a chat, answer further question or anything else, because that's the foundation of community.
Yeah,
absolutely. A final thought that I would have, or a final question, sorry, Claire, I feel like I've just cut across you there, is the next big thing, because all of a sudden after COVID, Zoom and Facebook live chats and all these live conferences and stuff became the big thing. But now that we're moving on, what do people think is the next big thing? What do people see in, we're not talking about 10 or 15 or 20 years will go away, but in the next year or so, what should we be looking out for? What's the next bandwagon we should be running after, Matt?
Bandwagons.
Electric bikes.
Well, I'm waiting for my first electric bike to arrive. And now they're legal in Northern Ireland. I think that there's great potential there. Although England's made scooters legal for big companies, but not for small companies, and they're not legal at all here. I don't know I mean. How many people?
There's all this big office space, if people are working from home.
I mean that we've posted a blog post on the Raise blog about how do you after lockdown, a lot of us were furloughed, a lot of us have been working on. How do you justify, if you've been working on and your performance has been good and everything like that, how do you justify spending an hour each way commuting into the office, paying for parking, or paying for the train or the bus? And that's just hours of lost productivity, hours of lost time with family or whatever, and the frustration and the harassment. I mean, I just don't know how a lot of companies can justify it. I mean, Allstate say that they're going to be they're ending, or they're not renewing the leases on 5 of their buildings across the UK, because they just see that people work just as well from home. So I think there's going to be a big thing about home working. And then what do you do with all these big empty office spaces? I think you have to turn them into homes. It's the only, it's either that or.
If you focus on home working, then the opportunities in security.
But sorry, hi everybody. I was reading there was a 220 billion commercial loans. All these new office spaces that have opened up. Says they need to turn it into homes because there'll be a big crash otherwise.
Yeah, they can't afford to leave them empty.
No, because it's 220 billion worth of people's pensions, which have been put into commercial office space in the city of London alone.
Yeah, and they're not going to get, but they're not going to get the same return out of a home that they would have got out of office space. Oh well, maybe in London, but no, nowhere else.
That is right. But some I know RBS has changed recently and said they want everybody can work from home, but like some firms are just saying you still got to go into the office.
Yeah.
To justify their costs.
Well, I started working from home in around 2001, and I never looked back. It was just obviously I was a network engineer, so it really didn't matter where I was. But at that date and time, it was just meant that I never had to take any time off when the carpet was being fitted. I just literally hid under the stairs in my little Harry Potter-esque container and worked away while people worked around me in the house. I didn't have, and that meant that any time off that I had was mine, as opposed to waiting for deliveries. I just don't, I think finally it's something that a lot of home workers have kind of thought, well, this is the future, and maybe a lot more knowledge workers are going to get an opportunity to taste it. I think it's best. Somebody did a poll on LinkedIn about what percentage would you like to work in the future? 100% from home, 100% in the office, 50-50. What is your percentage of what you think would be a good ratio? I'll open that up to anybody. What do you think?
I think my experience is, because we work primarily with individuals, professionals who work for and by themselves. A lot of them work from home. And before COVID came along, they were talking about how they would have to get out, otherwise the walls would close in on them. If too much working at home is bad. We're social animals, and we want to get out and see other people and see the world and smile and buy stuff and travel, and not necessarily get stuck in traffic jams, but certainly traveling into town at 11 o'clock in the morning is a lot better than traveling in at 8:30. And going to a coffee shop might be better than going to a dull old office, or one of these really nice co-working spaces like maybe River House or Ormo Baths. If you only have to go in there for an hour, it's a buzz. If you're there for 3 days, 17 hours a day, it becomes exhausting. So I think there's something in that where people will want to work more from home, but they'll still want the social interaction and the friendliness and the relationship building that can't be done from home. So I think your electric bike is going to be very useful, Matt.
Hope so.
I think having a real mix is really important, because I know back from my experience, whenever I started working for myself, I was working from home all day and take on a full-time job because I wanted the experience of working in an office. And then since leaving that job, I've been working for myself again, and I know that I enjoy working from home, and it's far more productive for me to work from home. But I think for the past since March, since I've been working with Raise, it's just I don't think I would have been able to do it if we didn't have Zoom communication and stuff like that, because if you were locked in, if we didn't have the actual communication tools there, it would just be so lonely and so boring to do it on your own. So I think these communication tools are essential for working from home, and I think having that sort of mix of both, where you can go into the personally, my preferred working space has always been coffee shops. I like working on my own, but I also like having people around me. So I think it's maybe co-working spaces may still exist, but maybe that's what they'll do with all the empty office spaces. I don't know. I always think there'll be some sort of, I would love to see if all the big corporates got together and sort of made big co-working spaces where everyone could just hang out and maybe do shopping or whatever at the same time. I don't know. Might happen someday.
I mean, that would be interesting, you know, like the big, you know, PwCs, Deloitte, they have such, you know, they have massive big software teams and stuff. If you go in and sit and listen to them, that would be interesting. And obviously they've got trade secrets, but
they've spent too much money building big offices, so it doesn't make sense for them to move so quickly. If you look at KPMG, they've all spent a lot of money on buying their own buildings. If you look at KPMG, they're in Wharf, they own the whole site.
For those that have bought their buildings, I absolutely agree. For those that like say Allstate are just, they decided they're not renewing the leases on 5 big buildings, which is about 10,000 people.
Of course, exactly. That does make sense.
Yeah.
Interesting times ahead, like you say, Martin. What is the next big thing? Tools to be able to communicate, definitely, and then tools to be able to travel and socialize as well. Bit of both. Yeah. Any other questions, Mandine? Any finishing thoughts?
I'm done.
Same. I'm done. That's all good for me. Very interesting meeting you all.
Yeah. Super. Thank you very much for your time, guys. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all at the next event. Yeah,
it's worth throwing out there that we might have the gaming event organised for the end of next month, the end of August. So it'll be like an event focused on the Northern Irish games industry. So that should be interesting. So you're all welcome to come along and hang out and chat with that. To be confirmed.
Yep, super. Brilliant. Enjoy the rest of your evening, guys, and have a great weekend.
Good, guys.
All right. See you later.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.